So you mentioned I listen to your podcast, the Crazy One podcast, and you have an entire episode on creativity as a blue-collar profession.
Yes.
And I found that fascinating. I think that was the first time I'd heard it expressed that way. Can you talk a little bit about what you've got an entire hour of it.
Yeah, no, I do. I can give you the Cliff Notes version. No, I think as a reaction to this want for leadership and stuff like that, and apparently because I have an allergy to free time, I started the podcast. And I think that one of the things for me was that I grew up in Pittsburgh during the collapse of the steel mills. So I really grew up around what were a lot of kind of like blue class, working class people. Yeah. And as I've gone on in my career, I had one distinct advantage, that my dad was a creative director, so I've been a paid designer since I was 12.
Nice.
What that taught me, or what that let me see, was an industry from the time whenever it was like doing paste-up keys and cutting ruby lith and a whole bunch of stuff that people are going to have to Google to figure out what it is. But I think that what it let me see is that the concept that ideas are a light bulb is bullshit. Like, that's not, we've all been conned into thinking that it's easy. And a lot of the times I look and try and figure out, okay, like, what are other industries? What are other things that I can use to explain what I mean? And I think creativity is essentially no different than being an athlete. If you talk about a football player, they train through the off season, they work through the weight room, they do a lot of this stuff to prepare for that moment of greatness, to be on the field to catch the ball. I think creativity is no different. I think that you have to go out and treat it like it's a blue-collar profession, that it is work, because two things. One is that a light bulb is inspiration. It's not an idea. It's identifying an area of opportunity that gets you excited. You then have to work and grind through a huge amount of that work to figure out what's the kernel, what's the execution, how do I get through all the bad to get to the good? And again, I think this is where a lot of that instant gratification kind of generation suffers with this, because they just want to do it once and be done. So I think there's that issue with it. But I think there's also really treating it like a blue-collar profession, because I think if you want to find great ideas, if you want to find breakthrough ideas, you have to find the opportunities and the moments in which those can live. Right? Because if you're an athlete, you don't just show up on the field on game day and say, okay, great, now I'm going to be athletic.
For the best, right.
Right. No, creative is no different. That if you're working in a particular industry, if you're working for a client, it's going out and living that industry. It's living whatever that is, so that you can say, hey, look, consumers are doing a workaround there. There's something missing there. That was harder than it should be. To identify these areas of opportunity that I can then go back and put in the time against to be able to have ideas there. And I think it's also just figuring out, like, I go to chefs a lot. I think it's an interesting parallel to the work that we do, but I look to them for inspiration. And I think that, like, one of the best chefs I ever talked with was the Jiro, the chef behind Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Yeah. And talked to him about, like, okay, whenever young chefs come in, how do you teach them how to be great? How do you teach them? And he had the best explanation around this I ever heard. He said, like, to cook great food, you have to have eaten great food.
That's fair enough.
And I think design is the same. I think you have to go out and consume whatever your given medium is. I think you have, because you need a palette for, okay, I found the area of opportunity, I've had the idea, how do I know if it's any good? Right. How do I know if it's going to resonate with people on just a conceptual and executional level? So if I'm not constantly working that palette, if I'm not constantly putting in that training, but that's the problem, is all that other stuff is the off-season stuff. It's thankless. It's for an opportunity that I don't know when it's going to show up. It's not fun. It's not like, okay, I'm going to go make something. And I think that's the part of it, and that's why I talk about it, is because I think there's become such an emphasis with so many designers just on the making. Making is going to dead-end your career. There's a lot of people that can make pretty pictures, especially here in New York, not hard to find. People who can think, people who can lead, people who can come in and change a business, unicorns.